Three Ukrainian drones tore through Russian airspace, racing against time. Suddenly, everything went dark. No GPS, no satellites, no signals. Just black screens and an invisible enemy lurking in the skies. What happened next should have been impossible. 6 drones had crossed into Russia, each programmed with a single deadly mission: to hunt down one of the most dangerous targets imaginable, a military train, 38 cars long. Its cargo carried enough firepower to flatten an entire city block. But by all calculations, the drones weren't supposed to make it this far. Russian electronic warfare systems had blanketed the skies, scrambling signals and shutting down guidance systems. It was just past 2 a.m. in Russia's Volgograd Oblast when the silence broke. Residents of the small town of Surovikino were startled awake by the unmistakable roar of fire. A railway station, one of Russia's crucial lifelines to the front, was burning. The strike had come from above. Ukrainian drones, small but precise, slipped past layers of Russian defenses and found their target. Not the rails themselves, that would have been repaired in days, but the heart of the station, an administrative hub coordinating trains that carried fuel, artillery, and ammunition straight to the battlefield. The plan was simple in its thinking and complex in its execution. Make the enemy pause. 3 Ukrainian drones lifted into the night sky, each with a clear purpose. They weren't meant to destroy an entire railway station. Their goal was to cause disruption. The Surovikino railway hub in Russia's Volgograd region was chosen carefully. It was a key point for moving weapons, fuel, and supplies to the front. If the trains stopped here, even for a short time, the delays would ripple through the Russian war effort. The drones didn't just fly straight in. The operation was planned for weeks. Ukrainian intelligence had studied the station's routines. When workers changed shifts, when patrols rotated, and when the station was busiest or most quiet. They noticed a window late at night, just after 2 a.m., when attention would be at its lowest. But between the attackers and that small, vital box of iron stood Russia's most sinister defense, the repellent one. In the command van, white-gloved operators watched their consoles like priests watching an oracle. The system began to sing, not with explosions, but with instructions it hoped the intruders would obey. Fake commands scrolled across screens, a cascade of authoritative orders: land, return, abort. The repellent's promise wasn't to shoot down an enemy so much as to steal it, to turn the drone into a pawn by overriding its will. They waited for the hijack signals to take effect. They waited in vain. What the operators didn't fully appreciate was that these weren't the slow, single-channel birds of old. The Ukrainian controllers had anticipated deception and layered their machines with autonomy and resilience. The drone's control signals jumped frequencies 1,000 times per second, not to taunt, but to survive, like a radio dial sweeping so fast no hand could track it. When the repellent beamed its orders, the drones didn't politely comply. They ignored, they adapted, and where necessary, they switched to pre-programmed mission primitives that treated hostile commands as noise. Each drone had a role. The first acted as a decoy, drawing Russian air defenses to one side. The second was the main attacker, carrying the payload aimed at the administrative building. The third followed slightly behind, ready to hit secondary targets or finish the job if the main strike failed. As they moved in, Russian defenses picked up one of the drones. Spotters and radar operators reacted quickly, but their systems were flooded with alerts. The decoy's presence made it unclear how many drones were actually coming and from where. Commanders had to make split-second choices, and that confusion created a small gap in the defenses. Through that gap, the other 2 drones slipped closer. By the time Russian crews realized the true direction of the attack, it was too late. The second drone slammed into the railway station's administrative office, sparking a massive fire. Important records, communications equipment, and part of the power supply for the hub were destroyed. Drone 3 followed a different path, targeting a smaller but equally important section near the signaling equipment. With a sudden dive, it exploded against the switching area, disabling systems used to route trains through the hub. For the defenders, the situation was now chaos. Flames were spreading, alarms were blaring, and communications lines were cut or jammed. Russian crews fired desperately, but they were already too late. By the time their missiles launched, the drones had either struck or were too close to stop. In some places, power surged and blacked out, leaving operators staring at dead screens. On social media, residents in Surovikino posted videos of the fire, towering flames consuming the station. The blaze wasn't just dramatic, it was symbolic. Trains were halted, supply chains interrupted, and entire shipments had to be rerouted to other, less efficient hubs. For Ukraine, this was a victory of precision. Instead of trying to destroy vast stretches of rail, the operation had crippled a key node, an artery that fed Russia's war machine. Military experts would later describe it as part of Ukraine's death by 1,000 cuts strategy. Small, repeated strikes that together wear down even a larger, better-equipped opponent. Russian emergency teams rushed to contain the flames, while defense officials claimed the rail tracks themselves were untouched. That was technically true, but the damage wasn't about broken rails. It was about stopping the station from functioning. Trains were delayed, schedules had to be rewritten, and military supplies were forced to reroute. The defenders had tried to stop the attack. Radar tracked dozens of objects that night, and official reports claimed 82 drones were shot down across Russia. Yet the 3 drones at Surovikino proved that even with strong defenses, some could still get through. For Ukraine, this wasn't just about one fire. It was part of a larger strategy: constant, precise strikes on rail hubs, depots, and refineries. Not enough to collapse the system in one blow, but enough to force Russia to waste time, manpower, and resources. A death by 1,000 cuts. The phrase "death by 1,000 cuts" was no exaggeration. Within hours of the Surovikino strike, the disruption became evident far beyond Volgograd Oblast. Freight timetables for critical military supply lines suddenly shifted, with trains carrying ammunition, fuel, and armored vehicles rerouted hundreds of kilometers to less efficient corridors. Russian logistics officers, already under immense pressure from commanders demanding punctual deliveries, scrambled to adapt. Each rerouting added hours, sometimes days, to a journey. Soldiers waiting at the front for fuel or artillery shells suddenly faced unexpected shortages, while backup convoys clogged already strained highways. Reports began circulating in Russian military channels that at least 5 separate shipments of fuel had to be diverted, forcing trucks to travel longer distances across vulnerable roads exposed to further Ukrainian ambushes. A senior logistics officer, speaking anonymously to a pro-war blog, admitted that the station was small, but its role was large. His words betrayed a painful truth. Ukraine had not just destroyed a building, it had engineered a ripple effect stretching across Russia's entire supply chain. On Ukrainian and Western channels, military analysts dissected the strike with forensic precision. Satellite images taken the following morning confirmed widespread damage to the administrative hub and the switching yard. The charred ruins of the control building stood as grim evidence of the attack's effectiveness. Power lines lay twisted and blackened. Several freight wagons sat immobilized on sidings, stranded in place as if frozen mid-movement. The symbolism was powerful. Russia's war machine literally stopped in its tracks. For residents of Surovikino, the reality was far more visceral. Families described the terrifying night in interviews with local independent outlets. The sound of drones buzzing faintly overhead, the sudden roar of explosions, and the shockwave that rattled windows and shook foundations. One shopkeeper recalled how the flames lit up the night, brighter than any sunrise. A young mother recounted shielding her children in a bathtub as debris rained across their street. Even after the fire was contained, the acrid smell of smoke lingered for days, a reminder that war had found its way into their quiet town. The strike also exposed once again the fragility of Russia's much-vaunted air defense systems. For months, Moscow had boasted about shooting down dozens of drones every night. Yet the images from Surovikino showed another reality. 3 drones, operating with careful coordination, had slipped through. Analysts noted that Russia's air defense network, designed primarily to counter missiles and aircraft, was struggling to adapt to swarms of small, low-cost UAVs that could exploit blind spots, overwhelm radar, or simply confuse operators. The Surovikino incident underscored the reality that in modern warfare, technology and cunning could defeat even layered defenses. Ukraine, for its part, celebrated the strike as another step in its evolving campaign. Officials did not formally acknowledge responsibility, maintaining the standard veil of plausible deniability. But anonymous sources in Kiev hinted to Western journalists that the operation had been weeks in the making. "We study their arteries like doctors studying a patient," one intelligence officer allegedly said. "You don't always go for the heart first. Sometimes you cut circulation until the body weakens." The international response was equally telling. Military observers in NATO countries pointed to the Surovikino strike as evidence of Ukraine's growing sophistication. Far from random sabotage, this was a calculated attack designed not for spectacle, but for strategic effect. British analysts compared it to Allied bombing campaigns in World War II, where instead of targeting tanks or soldiers directly, rail yards and supply hubs were systematically dismantled to choke enemy offensives. In Washington, defense officials quietly noted that Ukraine's precision drone warfare was setting a precedent for future conflicts worldwide. For Russia, the strike carried deeper psychological weight. It highlighted a vulnerability few in Moscow wanted to admit, that the war's vast infrastructure, its trains, depots, pipelines, and refineries, could be targeted deep inside the homeland. Each strike eroded not just logistics, but morale, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of soldiers and civilians alike. If a small town in Volgograd could burn, where else could the fire spread? Which rail hub would be next? In the weeks following Surovikino, chatter on Russian pro-military forums grew more desperate. Some users demanded stronger protection of rear-area infrastructure, while others openly criticized leadership for underestimating Ukraine's capabilities. One particularly blunt commentator wrote, "They keep saying everything is under control, yet our trains burn at night. If they can hit here, they can hit anywhere." Such voices, once silenced by censors, began multiplying, reflecting a quiet but spreading unease. Ukraine, meanwhile, pressed its advantage. Just days after Surovikino, new reports emerged of attempted drone strikes on another railway hub farther north. Though less successful, the attempt forced Russia to divert additional resources, anti-aircraft batteries, patrol units, and repair crews, away from the front lines. The brilliance of the thousand cuts strategy was not in any single spectacular victory, but in forcing Russia into a constant defensive crouch, always reacting, always patching holes, always bleeding resources it could ill afford to lose.